Good evening, everybody. The haunting tones of Nutana Tugaf welcome us in. That's Rabbi Angela Buchdal at the Central Synagogue in New York. Okay, let's just get right into this because this is a boot camp. It's going to be really, we're going to be trying to shove information down your throats. So going to be heavy on the content and maybe less on the discussion than I'm usually inclined towards. But I thought to do this because I heard from a number of you that you were, look, I heard from a number of you that you're just sort of wondering what this season of awe is going to be like this year when, for a lot of us, the best options are just, tuning in online. And so there's a kind of a existential, spiritual, psychic struggle there. How are we going to make it feel powerful and potent and real? We're certainly trying our best to make sure that can happen even online. But I think that I heard a particular anxiety within that, the anxiety that I think we all feel. Some people expressed a particular anxiety about this book, this big book, which rests on our lap for 3 days a year, and we are told what pages to go to, and we're told, and we hear the music around us, and I think for a lot of us, we just we follow along or we don't. We just let the music wash over us, and it's fine, but we don't really know what's going on inside this book. And now being confronted with the idea of navigating the Rosh Hashanah service on your own, or at least only guided by someone on the other side of a screen. I think a lot of people said, I want to know what is even in here? What is this thing? So I think we could use this sort of primer every year, but maybe especially this year. And I keep saying this book, and that is to say that there is a whole book, a special book of prayers just for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's called the Machzor. We usually use the Sidur, but there is a Sidur, meaning the arrangement, but there is the Machzor, the thing that we return to every year, the special arrangement for the high holidays. And that sounds daunting, doesn't it? An entire book of new prayers to learn. Well, I see some people have got it out there, right? Matt's got it there. We're going to be looking today at the one that we use at Ikar, the Lev Shalem, which is a pretty good machzor. And I want to say at the outset, and Andrea will help me here, that we have free downloads available to our community through which the publisher made available. And you can even download it right now in order to look at. I, as usual, will screen share when we're looking at text, so you can just chill out and I'll put it on screen. But if you'd like to have the Machzor as a separate window, or if you just want to download it now, and you'll be able to, with this code, keep it throughout the holidays. So you're seeing now in the chat, there's a it's a little complicated, not actually as complicated as it first appears, but it's a little complicated because you have to go to this website, enter in the code that allows it to be free. And then I was stuck for a while, and I realized then you have to redeem the code. So there's 3 steps, but when you do, you have access to, here, I'll just show you what we're going to be using tonight. It'll look eventually like this, which is very, very nice. Here, I'll full screen it for a sec. And you can scroll right through. It's funny because down here, you'll see we're on page 944 because of the way they make other books available online, and they don't expect it to be Hebrew. So it'll be a little complicated because I'll be calling pages from the book itself, like page 2, but you'll have to ignore that here it says page 944. But it's a pretty good, I hope it works. Look at this. Seems to be still loading, but it was working just a minute ago, so we'll see. Okay, so that's information that you have. Anything, any questions about there? Any more information that they need, Andrea? Okay, all right.
Just message me directly if anybody has any trouble. I can try to help you out.
I'm looking at my version though. It's suddenly not working. What is going on here? All right, I hope it eventually does. Could be very bad. Okay.
David, did it say like $6 before redeem the code? Mine said like $5.99.
Yeah, but you put in the code and redeem it, and it's free.
And it's fine. And if we want to buy a mock sword that nice to see you.
Nice.
If we want to buy a mock sword, can we still do that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, best recommendation is to have a book, and this is a good one to have.
David, they are out of print until December. We can't buy them.
All right. So download whatever. Okay. All right. Let's get started because I'm going to try my best to do this in an hour. Though we have a massive amount to cover, but actually, in some ways we don't. In some ways we don't, because I think one of the messages that I want to give across right away that I think will be a relief is that there's not as much new material as the fact of the machzor seems to suggest. The machzor seems to the very fact that we have this whole other book for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur seems to be like, well, there's a book's worth of information to learn for or of prayers to learn for these holidays, but that's not the case. In fact, here, I'm going to give you a source sheet. We're going to look at some sources to understand how the prayers are composed. So there's a source sheet there for you. And let me screen share it now. Let's just start off by saying a few broad things about the high holiday liturgy. So there are essentially, I would say, 3 kinds of prayers that we encounter on the high holidays. Now, the first kind, and by far the largest, are standard prayers. That means these are prayers that we will see every day of the year, or at least on Shabbat. So a lot of these prayers, you get this big chunky book, but most of it's just like another Siddur, okay? And part of what it will mean to understand what's distinct about Rosh Hashanah's or Yom Kippur. We'll do Yom Kippur next week, okay? We're not going to try to do literally everything tonight, but we're going to try to do a lot tonight. Part of what is important about understanding the Rosh Hashanah liturgy is to know what here is new, what's distinct, okay? And most of it is not so good news, okay? So that's the first kind of prayer that we encounter. For example, the Shema. Like we'll say the Shema on Rosh Hashanah morning, both mornings, just like we do on Shabbat and just like we do every day of the year. Okay, so that's an example. The second kind of liturgy, and actually, I would say the most famous kind of liturgy that we encounter on the high holidays is what's called piyutim. Piyutim, my definition here is a sacred poem, and I just mean the word piyut is from the Greek that we get our word poet, so it really literally it means that. But it's poetry that has been written by they call them paitanim, by poets, but by rabbis and scribes and poets over the years that are just sort of like elegant little testimonies of faith or worship, and they are inserted into the prayers. And we come across them all the time. We just heard one sung at the outset. Some of the most famous parts of the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur liturgy are piyutim. They're the songs we all sing, right? Like Hayom, 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 right? That's a piyut, and there's different things that Hayom, this day, is. Now, that is to say that one of the major chunks of high holiday liturgy are these poems, but here's what I want to say about the poems. They're actually, of these 3 things, these 3 sections of our high holiday liturgy, all of a sudden, they're the least, dare I say, important, by which I mean they're the least obligatory. One of the things that we've been doing this year at Ikar and at many shuls is trying to figure out, well, what can we cut out? Because good Lord knows we can't ask people to sit and watch a 6-hour service, right? So what can we cut out? What are the bare bones? What are the basics? And the easiest thing to cut out are piyutim, because they are extra, they're flourish, and in fact, almost no one, I mean, I guess no one says all the piyutim. There are different traditions of which piyutim to say, and even with a certain tradition, you usually don't say all of the piyutim in your tradition because you would just be there all day and all night, okay? The best way to recognize a piyut is that it looks like a poem, okay? The best way to recognize, though that's not true for all of them, the best way to, how do I know when I see a piyut? I see a line after line, and usually 2 columns of lines. So there's a kind of a pattern to the way it's written, like a very, and not just like a modern poem, like iambic pentameter, like there's a structure here to these poems. So those are very classic, but we're not actually going to spend a lot of time on them tonight. We will note them. A lot of times when you do like Rosh Hashanah prayer prep, you'll spend your whole time studying Unutana Tokef, because it's a very difficult prayer about dying and living, and there's beautiful and it's disturbing, and there's a lot to investigate there. But for our purposes of just knowing what's in there, the piyutim, there's lots of piyutim. There's lots of great little poems written about Rosh Hashanah and God and us and all these things, but they're just, they're skippable. And the fact that I've said that they are there, okay, now you know that they're there, and I will try to learn to identify them as they come along. Another pro tip here is that the piyutim are mostly placed in the repetition of the Amidah. So when the Chazan repeats the Amidah, the standing prayer, which we're actually going to talk about in greater depth in a second, that's where you put all the piyutim so that everybody can sing them together. So actually you don't even encounter piyutim for most of the prayers, just until you get to that kind of public recitation. Okay, so those are 2, that clears out a lot of what's new about Rosh Hashanah. How do I understand these prayers? Well, they're mostly the same. And then the things that are additional are often just these cool little poems, which are extra, which are skippable. So that brings us to the third category of liturgy, which is the one that we're really focusing on tonight, which is what are the prayers that are unique to this holiday? What are the prayers that we are to say? They are core parts of the liturgy, but they really are distinct. They are unique to Rosh Hashanah or to Yom Kippur. And even there, I would just add one further nuance and say, even there are some unique insertions or substitutions, just one-liners or an extra verse here that gets stuck in. We'll note those as we go. But the most important part of our study tonight will be looking at additional services, things that are unique as entire services to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, okay? And before we head in to either of these sessions, as I said, there's going to be one tonight and one tomorrow. I just want to give you the biggest pro tip of all, which is that when you are looking for what's going on in the prayer, in the liturgy of this holiday, the action is always in Musaf, which is the second Amidah we say during the day. That's the one dedicated to the day itself. As I already said, a lot of the other prayers are standard. This is unique to the day, and it will usually hold for us the exciting material. Exciting, by which I mean, you know, the new, the saying something distinct about this day material. And that is certainly true. In fact, it is never more true than it is in Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah's Musaf is a masterpiece, and it is also a monster. It is a behemoth. It is the longest Musaf of the year, and it's very, very complicated. And if we do nothing else tonight, we're going to try and understand its structure, because in it are really the core prayers of Rosh Hashanah. And I don't mean to diminish. It could be that you have a favorite piyut, which is the core prayer of Rosh Hashanah. And I also want to say that even as we study these prayers, the bottom line is that the most important thing that one does ritually on Rosh Hashanah is to hear the shofar. If you hear the shofar, that's it. That's it. You did everything else is window dressing, right? So that is to say that we're going to be focusing on the two major sections of addition to Rosh Hashanah, and one of them is that massive musaf, and the other one is just to note the shofar service when we get to it, okay? All right, I'm not going to take too many questions, but any questions related to what I said so far? Clarification questions? Okay, all right. You'll forgive me, I hope. I'm just going to rumble forward here. I have, in case Andrea reminds me that sometimes people have just joined, so let me, for those who have just joined, give you this source sheet, because part of what we're going to do is just understand the basic structure of the prayer. In some ways, I want to give you the origins, the textual history that clarifies what I've just said, which is there are basic prayers. What are they? And then what's extra? And for some of you have been studying with me Maimonides over these last weeks. Maimonides, who's the great expert summarizer. Maimonides is like one of the greatest summarizers of all time, and he summarizes everything in Judaism. That's sort of one of his tasks in this book, the Mishnah Torah. And here is his summary of the prayers. And he goes on a long discussion of how the prayers came to be, and the gist of which is that the prayers are there as substitutes for the daily sacrifices. So there used to be, there are 3 daily prayers. There used to be 2 sacrifices every single day, right? A tamid, morning sacrifice, and an afternoon mincha sacrifice. And then there's a long discussion, which I won't get into now, like that the rabbis said that the prayers were in replacement of the sacrifices, but then added an evening prayer and came up with a sort of a reason that there was no evening sacrifice. And you start to get the sense that the rabbis just wanted there to be 3 prayers a day because they felt like that was good spiritual practice. But the bottom line is that those are the origins. And once the rabbis begin to, and when I say the rabbis, what I mean and what Maimonides means are not the rabbis of the Talmudic period, but Ezra, as in the book of Ezra, and Ezra's court of people that came back from Babylon after the first exile and basically said, oh my gosh, how are we going to rebuild this society? One of the things we need is standard prayers. So when we talk about standard prayers, we're going all the way back to Ezra, right? That is, at least as our tradition records it, that's where these prayers start. So Ezra instituted 3 prayers, and they are namely the evening service, Aravit, as the Sephardim say, or Mariv, as we say. Not we, but me. The morning service, Shacharit, and the afternoon service, Mincha. Okay, those are the 3 prayers. And I'm telling you this again now because that already tells you a lot about what will happen on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because there will be a morning service and an afternoon service and an evening service, just like there is on every other day, okay? On Sabbaths, festivals, and new moons, there are 4. 3 daily services and the additional service. Musaf means additional, okay? So that also tells you, oh, okay, so on Rosh Hashanah, there will be also a musaf. But you know, that's nothing new. There already was a musaf on Shabbat. So we do prayer boot camps from time to time at Ikar, and there's another time when we can just really break down the very idea of the Amidah or the very idea of musaf. But for our purposes, I want to use the weekday and Shabbat prayers as a kind of a backdrop, or not even that, a kind of a foundation upon which Rosh Hashanah builds, right? So the basic structure is the same. Now, interestingly, that won't be true next week, because as the Maimonides continues, on the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippur, there are 5 services. The 4 just mentioned, and Ne'ilah, the closing prayer. So that's like bing, 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 prayers unique to the holiday. unique to the holiday is Ne'ilah. On no other day of the year do you have another Amidah. Amidah means standing, and it's that silent standing prayer that is first said by the individual and then repeated by the Chazan. And that's what I mean when I say the repetition has all of the singing and the poetry, okay? So on Yom Kippur, there are 5. On Rosh Hashanah, there are 4 services: evening service, next day morning service, then Musaf, and then Mincha, right? Every one of those is going to have an Amidah, and also going to have some of the basic blessings and basic components that those services have in the other days. So much so that we're not even going to look at Rosh Hashanah evening service tonight, because it is nearly indistinguishable from Mariv, Aravit, the rest of the year, okay? When you go to Shul on Rosh Hashanah evening, I always feel like every year I'm like surprised, oh right, Rosh Hashanah evening is so short. Like there's almost nothing to it, because there's no repetition in the evening service, and you just say the Shema and the Amidah is a little different, but it always is on Shabbat and holidays, so we're not even going to cover that. But it gives you a taste of how, in some ways, standard the high holiday prayers can be, okay? Let's now just move back so that we have this structure in place and just sort of again see what then is the numbers of prayers in a day. That's what we just learned. On the weekday, it's three prayers. Morning, or actually our days start with evening. So evening, morning, afternoon. On Shabbat and holidays, it's evening, morning, Musaf, the additional prayer, here on my hand, and afternoon. And then in Yom Kippur, there will be 5, okay? So the Amidah, as I said, is the sort of, that's the central service. That's the centerpiece of each of those services. And in it, we will find some of the central blessings, but especially in Musaf, we're gonna see the liturgy really go to town with Rosh Hashanah. And in some ways, we're really just heading towards Musaf. That's the only prayer we're gonna study in great depth tonight. Okay, but let's come to understand one other thing before we start looking at the Machzor itself, which is that the Amidah looks different it's not just, I've so far said, oh, there's a morning service on the weekday, there's a morning service on Rosh Hashanah, there's a morning service, there's an evening service on the weekday, there's an evening service on Rosh Hashanah. But the Amidah of the holidays looks different than the Amidah of the regular day, of the weekday, sorry. And that is because in the regular weekday, in each of the 3 daily services, this is again Maimonides, the Rambam, a person recites 19 blessings, okay? Originally, by the way, it was 18 blessings. It was called the Shmona Esrei, which means the 18 blessings that were instituted by the rabbis. And then as Maimonides tells it, those were instituted by Ezra, but the rabbis added one more because they were worried about heretics, infiltration of heretics, and they added one extra blessing to damn the heretics. In fact, Emily, recommended to me this book, The Orchard, and in The Orchard, they sort of tell the story of the rabbis scheming to insert one extra blessing, right? So it's a worthwhile recommendation. But that's to say, every day, every regular day, when we say in Amidah, we say the 18 blessings in their order. But on Shabbat, we only say 7 blessings in the Amidah. On Sabbath and festivals, 7 blessings are recited in each of the 4 services for the day. Now, this is important because he's going to tell you something about the structure of the Amidah. Namely, the usual first 3 blessings and last 3 blessings, okay? And an intermediate blessing appropriate to the particular day, okay? That's important because the structure of the Amidah is almost always the same. There are always the first 3 blessings, standard, there are always the last 3 blessings, standard. And then in the middle, during the regular week, we say, well, I guess 13 extra blessings. But on Shabbat and holidays, we only say 1 extra blessing, okay? And that extra blessing is like, hooray for Shabbat, or hooray for the, for this holiday. Now, does anyone know why we don't say all those other extra blessings? There's a very straightforward reason. The reason is traditionally, the first 3 blessings are thought of as the blessings of praise. Oh God, you're so great. And the last 3 blessings are thought of as thanks, like thanks God for doing all of it. The middle 13 blessings are requests. Like these are the things we need. And they're really basic needs like health and like produce, right? So those are weekday concerns. And on Shabbat, we put aside all of our bakashot, all of our requests, and we focus on the work of the day. I mean, the truth is on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we're requesting different things, spiritual salvation, but nevertheless, we don't move through our catalog of requests. We just focus on the blessing of the day. So the Amidah of Shabbat and of Rosh Hashanah, of all these days, is 7 blessings long. The first 3, the middle blessing, and then the last 3. All of which just, like, so far we've just been talking about what are the standard prayers and what is the difference between weekday prayers and holiday prayers. And Maimonides goes on and says, well, on Shabbat, that middle blessing has this ending, and on festivals it has this ending, and there are, when the Sabbath and a festival are on the same day, like when, as it will be this year, we say, Mikadesh et HaShabbat et Yisrael ve'et hazmanim, like all of those things, Sabbath, Israel, and the seasons. Here we begin to see something different about Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah's Amidah, which especially in Musaf will look nothing like anything that we've said so far. So on New Year, the conclusion, that is the closing of the blessing is like a whole paragraph, whole section, and the conclusion on Rosh Hashanah is this right here: Melech al kol haaretz mikadesh Yisrael v'yom hazikaron. Okay, king over all the earth who sanctifies Israel in the day of remembrance. Right, which you can also add to the Sabbath, like as it will be on the first day of Rosh Hashanah this year. So this is important just because it is a standard feature of holiday liturgy to be mindful of whether or not we're also doing Shabbat. Because when we're also doing Shabbat, then we say the same thing, but add Shabbat. So we say Melech al kol haaretz mikadesh hashabbat v'Yisrael v'yom hazikaron. Okay, we'll keep track of that later. It's a relatively minor point, but it's just to say, oh, the blessings will be, the ending to the blessing for that middle blessing will be distinct, and sometimes we have to take into account that we're also saying it for Shabbat. But here's the big news, folks. Here's the distinct and surprising thing about Rosh Hashanah, okay? The foregoing, everything that the Rambam has said so far applies to the evening, morning, and afternoon services of the new year. But the additional service, that is the Musaf service on the new year, consists of 9 blessings. The first 3 and the last 3 recited daily, standard, and 3 intermediate. Not 1, but 3 this time. Of these intermediate benedictions, not my translation, the theme of the first is kingship, the second is remembrance, while the third is shofar. Each of these blessings concludes with a formula appropriate to its theme. So let me just say that again. This is like the most important line in a way you'll read all night. Of these intermediate blessings, the theme of the first is kingship. Of the second is remembrance, while the third is shofar. Now, I want to just ask you about that in a second. We're going to take a pause here from my my stream of liturgical consciousness here. Okay, just to review, the number of blessings in an Amidah, in a standing prayer. On a weekday, there are 19, 18 plus 1. On Shabbat and holidays, all of them, there are 7. But on Rosh, Hashanah, Musaf, there are 9. So that in itself tells you what I said before. Musaf is where the action is. Musaf is the big prayer of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Now, I want to just pause before, and then we're going to head into there's more to learn here, which we'll come back to when we get into the most complicated piece, actually looking at the Musaf there. But I want to look at the Machzor itself, get into the Machzor itself. Before I do, I just want to pause and say, you have now been introduced to the 3 central themes of the Rosh Hashanah liturgy: kingship, remembrance, and shofar. Malchuyot, zichronot, and shofrot. Now, I have to say, I've never totally understood why those are the 3 themes. Meaning, I get why those are Rosh Hashanah themes, but they don't feel like a trio, and they don't feel like the only important things to talk about, and they don't feel like they go together or they flow or they explain. So I don't, I want to take a pause here just to see, does anyone have any thoughts on kingship, remembrance, and shofarot as the central 3 themes, or just any questions on what we've said so far? So just a little station break here. Anybody want to jump in and say, here's what those are about, or here's what I always think of, or just any questions you have so far? Okay. It's not I haven't sent it up as an interact. Oh, I see Taryn. Taryn! How you doing? Haven't seen you in a while.
I've been working for the census. It's been eating my life.
Oh, okay. All right. Yashar koach. All right, so what are you thinking?
I'm thinking actually, for me, the 2 that really make sense together are kingship and shofar. More so, like, I get that Rosh Hashanah is the day of remembrance, but I feel like that in and of itself feels a little weird, because it's like not like, if God is always present with us, why does God need to remember us on Rosh Hashanah? Like, I really think that shofar and kingship like make a lot of sense.
Okay.
Almost in the opposite, like the opposite direction. Like, I think that you need the shofar to get to the kingship, because the shofar is like something that opens you up and lets you get to that place where you can actually do the great Aleinu.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say I don't need any explanation. So what you're saying sounds right. I don't need any explanation for shofar, because like that's the thing. We know that we blow a shofar. Okay, fine. But why is kingship the obvious thing? Why do you think that one's also a no-brainer?
I mean, because I think that maybe it's just how people talk about Rosh Hashanah, but like it seems like at a point in time when we're so like, when it's so much about like acknowledging that we don't have, like, there's a greater power than us in the universe, like it would make sense that like that would be it. Not that.
Okay, that's very well said. And Taryn's right that kingship comes to be spoken about as one of the central themes of Rosh Hashanah. Now, interestingly, it's not like that. What's the chicken and the egg here? Like, where does that come from? Because it's not obvious that Rosh Hashanah would be all about God's kingship. It's one of the metaphors that we use for God in the Torah, but in Rosh Hashanah becomes the metaphor, and Rosh Hashanah almost becomes thought of as a day of coronation. We are recognizing God as our ruler, as our sovereign. Okay, great, but like, why all this focus on that? That's for a different, like a longer discussion. But noted, that becomes a primary theme. Shofar, as we said, is kind of obvious. Remembrance is mysterious, as Taryn says, and I think that's right. Although the holiday is called Yom Zichron Truah, the day of remembering the sound of Truah. So in a way, that's the one that's the most, like, that most sourced, okay? But we are starting to see three themes that become very prominent, and we'll have to investigate what does it mean, remembrance. We'll learn that a little bit once we get to the Musaf. All right, I'm gonna take one more comment. I can't help but take, you know, like I like a little discussion, but then we'll dive back in. Yonatan?
Oh, I'm really glad that Taryn said that monarchy was obvious, because to me that was the one that was kind of the odd one out. That the other two are derived. If all we had was the written Torah, we would only do Zikaron and Tuah, right? We wouldn't even do Shofar. It would be Tuah, which we kind of juxtapose in our minds, but that's a rabbinic juxtaposition. And then I think the monarchy bit of it just represents the rabbinic imagination and what they read into Rosh Hashanah, which is never called Rosh Hashanah in Torah, right? And how they imagined it, or the significance that the rabbis saw in it.
Yeah. In other words, part of what we're getting when we get this machzer is we're getting the prayer author's take on what's this all about. And the prayer authors of Musaf, which we'll soon see, are the rabbis, because it starts in the Mishnah itself, the original rabbinic code from the 3rd century. They really felt these are the three themes that they wanted you thinking about. There were other themes that appear that we could have thought about, the birth of the world, things like that. But in the liturgy, especially in Musaf, we're going to see those three come to the fore. Okay, for time's sake, I'm going to plow forward. And now I want to, and hope to God this works. If not, I may need to just call it out from page numbers and trust that your downloads work. But let's take a look now at the actual liturgy. And I want to just kind of clock through and show you what it means that we've now understood that most of our prayers are standard, and note where there are deviations, okay? So let's begin, and let's see how big, I don't want it that big. Okay. All right, let's see here. Okay, so as I said, evening service, we're not even gonna bother with the evening service. We're gonna skip through because look, there's the Shema like it always is. Okay, and some of the things we'll learn later will apply to the evening service. But here, let's see if we can make this a little bit bigger. Ooh, a little too much. Come on now, where's just right? Maybe I should do full screen. That's what I'll do. All right. So here's the evening service, the silent Amidah. One thing that is noteworthy just in terms of this Sidur is that because the Amidah is the same for the evening service, the morning service, and the afternoon service, the book will tell you always to come back to page 11 for your silent Amidah. It gets a little different once the Chazan repeats it, but this is just like a use of this book tip, which is that you'll constantly be coming back to the silent Amidah on page 11. You recite the silent Amidah, it says at the evening and morning services of Rosh Hashanah. Oh, maybe they have a different one for Mincha, but anyway, here it is on page 11. And now I'm just gonna move through to the morning service. Isn't this nice? We have our own little online prayer book here. Okay. Rosh Hashanah at home. Okay, here we are. So now we're at the morning blessings. Same morning blessings, just to make the point, that we would see on any day of the year. And same blessings over the Torah, same blessings on arising, etc., etc. And so it is that the beginning, as you walk into services on Rosh Hashanah morning, you will say Psukei de Zimra, the opening psalms that we start with on every morning prayer, that begin with Baruch She'amar, and that begin every morning prayer, and that are elaborated somewhat on Shabbat. So just to give you one example of that, elaboration, meaning Psukei de Zimra is a bunch of psalms that we say before we start our prayers in earnest, before we say the Shema. And it is mostly, they're the same. It is true that on Shabbat, there are some extra additions like this Kilo Olam Chasdo, which is sort of a mini Hallel. So just as we'll see that on Shabbat, we'll also see that on Rosh Hashanah. Okay? So part of what you're seeing is this is not new to Rosh Hashanah, but it is there in the sense that Rosh Hashanah is a festival, a holiday. Okay? But that's pretty much all we need to know about, well, what's different about that opening part of the prayer, because most of it is quite standard. All right, I'm moving through now Psukei de Zimra, and the first new thing that I will notice is actually itself not a new thing. The first time you really feel, oh, Rosh Hashanah is starting, is on page 69, and it is because the Chazan begins, like usually a new Chazan will come in, someone's been leading Psukei de Zimra, and then a new Chazan will come in right here at Hamelech, right? The king or sovereign, right? Now, even that's not new. In fact, this is here on Shabbat every day of the year, but the practice of the Chazan coming in right here, as opposed to right up here, is different. You all see my cursor, right? Usually the Chazan starts up here, but instead on Rosh Hashanah, the Chazan starts just a few lines later. And this is important, a lot of what's different about Rosh Hashanah is not the words, but the nusach, the melody. The nusach is both the melody and the choices that one makes about where to emphasize or begin. So the Chazan begins here, and it's a very famous opening. It's like, that ends with Hamelech, right? Oh, it's Rosh Hashanah. You never have that opening except on Rosh Hashanah, even though this word, sovereign, sovereign enthroned on high, dwelling forever, that's on Shabbat, okay? So you start to get a feeling with the nusach, with the sound, that things are going to be different. That's the very end of Psukei de Zimra, which ends with this Yishtabach, as it does on Shabbat and every day. And then we're going to get our first insertion. Remember I said there are little insertions along the way, and one of the first insertions is Psalm 130 is recited at the end of Psukei de Zimra. Psalm 130 is recited Shir Hamalot, and it's recited responsively. And the reason that it is because out of the depths I call out to you, right? So that's very Rosh Hashanah-y, isn't it? Right? I'm really calling out. It's from a deep place. It's hard. I need you. Look at these last lines. God will redeem Israel from all its transgressions. Oh, well, that's good. But this is just an insertion. It's not like the ancient sages were talking about how you had to say this. It's just over the years they decided, why don't we say this psalm as well? Okay? So that's page 70, first insertion. Then the Chetzi Kaddish, then Baruch Hu. Standard, we say Baruch Hu every day. But there's another tiny little insertion here, and I'm not going to go over every single insertion, but I just want to give you a sense that this Baruch Hu would be here on a weekday, right? And also on Shabbat. But this line right here, for those who are paying very close attention, or Olam Bo'otzar Chaim, Orut Me'ofel Amar Vayihi, which is, where is that? The eternal light is found in the treasury of life. God said, let there be light from the darkness, and so it was. That's unique. That's different. That's Rosh Hashanah liturgy. But it's just the line. It's just like, it's like a little, like sprucing, a little embellishment. But then we're back in the Shema, right? The same Shema that we would have, the same blessings of the Shema that we would have on the weekday or on a little embellished Shabbat. And actually here, we have to start to pay attention to whether or not it's Shabbat. And you can see that at the top of page 72. On weekdays, we recite the following, as we do on every weekday. But on Shabbat, we recite this, right? So that's because it's Shabbat, not because it's Rosh Hashanah, okay? So keep that in mind, that there are, when it's Shabbat, and the Machzor makes a note of it here, oh my gosh, Shabbat, okay? But for the most part, we're then back into Shema. Shema, which, And I apologize if anyone is like, wait, why don't you explain Shema? Then I apologize, and all I can say is take another boot camp class. We've done some of the more core prayers, but for our purposes tonight, I'm just skipping the core prayers like Shema. But yes, we say them in the morning on Rosh Hashanah as we would on any morning. Okay, so moving through the Shema, and then we get to the silent Amidah for Rosh Hashanah. Now, as I said, the silent one will be, for the morning, it will be back on page 11, but we'll just go straight to the repetition of the Amidah. Now, repetition of the Amidah is, this is a good place to start talking about insertions, because you'll see these insertions, some of these insertions in your own Amidah as well. There are, first of all, this is an insertion right here, inspired by the insights of sages, right? But that's just in the Chazan's repetition. What's important for us, and some of the classic insertions are right here. There are, in the first two blessings and in the last two blessings of the Amidah, there are special insertions for the high holidays that we will say throughout the high holidays, and you may remember the tune for them. Here's one, Zochreinu. Zochreinu lechayim, melech hafetz b'chayim, v'chasveinu b'sefer chayim, laman chaloim chayim. That's in the first blessing. That's an insertion, and your standard Amidah will be moving along, but all of a sudden you'll say that as well. Remember us for life, sovereign, who delights in life, and inscribe us in the book of life for your sake, God of life. Okay? So that's the first blessing. Then there's the second blessing, and there's also an insertion here. I'm giving you the way the Chazan would sing it, or the Ashkenazi Chazan would sing it, but you'll also say this in your private Amidah. But I mean, it's so small if you think about it, but yes, that's distinct to Rosh Hashanah, okay? So then, look at what it says here. 3 piyutim introduce the Kedusha. And how do we recognize piyutim? Look, we have 2 columns. There are other hints. They follow the alphabet, right? But for our purposes, just know this is flourish. This is beautiful. This is extra, okay? And we're not going to spend time going through all the piyutim tonight, but you can notice them. And there aren't piyutim in your private Amidah. There are piyutim in the repetition. So here's another piyut. Oh, it looks like a piyut. And this is where we sing the songs, Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, or whatever it is. Like we sing these songs, and this is like the rousing best part of the service, but it's also the least essential part of the service and the least kind of core to Rosh Hashanah. We're on page 85, yet another piyut. And then we're in the Kedusha of the Amidah. There's a Kedusha for the Shabbat, so there's a Kedusha for the Amidah. This is responsive prayer in the Amidah. And then this right here is the blessing, the standard blessing. Remember, on holidays, there's a middle blessing, and it's the fourth blessing. So this is the fourth blessing, okay? And it has some standard holiday stuff. You have chosen us from among all peoples. That's a part of liturgy we see on the holidays, but it's not that distinct. I mean, what's distinct about this middle blessing? As Maimonides told us, it ends with the blessing Melech al kol haaretz mekadesh, either in red the Shabbat and, or if it's not Shabbat, Yisrael b'yom hazikaron. Blessed are you, Adonai, ruler of all the earth, who makes Shabbat, the people of Israel, in the day of remembrance, holy. Okay, so that's the Amidah. Then I'll just mention the towards the end, the last 2 blessings. There are, you'll see in bold here, other little insertions. Uchtov lechaim tovim kol b'nei britecha. That's the third of the classic Amidah insertions. And the last one, my favorite here, towards the end, is B'sefer Chaim. B'sefer Chaim, bracha v'shalom. I would like to sing the whole thing, but we're short on time. So that's a last insertion for the Amidah. Okay? So that, let me just pause here for 1 second before I keep rumbling on, because that, like, we're starting to see there are little differences here and there, but I hope you have the impression that all of this so far is not so different from Shabbat. Any big major questions so far? Anything confusing? I know I'm spitting out a lot of Hebrew and a lot of prayer in a very short time. Anything else? Okay. All right, let's go back. And oh, Barbara, yes. Can you unmute yourself, Barbara? You have to hit the unmute button here. I'll see if I can do it for you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Maybe this isn't part of it, but I'm assuming that the melody is crucial. And where does that melody come from? If you're not schooled and you don't know the Hebrew, is the melody actually in the text? And how does that melody come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. The nusach, what I mentioned earlier, is just like the tradition for how we say these prayers. And it is, first of all, not standard in the sense that there's a major division between Ashkenazi and Sephardi, but there's all kinds of nuschot, right? Or do you say nusachim if it's about? Yeah, I think it's nuschot, all these different varieties. And the melody is something you just learn over time, over the years. So
how yes.
By being in shul or by learning directly from a chazan.
And how did it begin from the very beginning?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question. There are scholars of such things, but I don't know how far back it goes. You'll hear things all the time, like Shlomo Carlebach used to sing like a very like a nigun for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and claimed that this one goes all the way back to the Beit HaMikdash. It was like a very sort of famous, but like, I don't know, did it, or does it just go back so far that we don't remember, right? Some of them, meanwhile, like they're being reinvented all the time because people are coming up with all kinds of new melodies. But there are some, like for me, there's like, as an Ashkenazi boy, I think like there are some classics like, you know, like the blessings always end with like, so that sound is a very, like if you know that sound, you can sort of like play with it. Like these aren't exact formulas, but you have a general melody that you keep kind of leaning back on, and that's the nusach. That makes sense? I mean, it doesn't make total sense, but yeah, it makes some sense. Yeah. Okay, any other pressing questions? Great, thanks, Barbara. Okay, so let's get back to our I can tell already we're close to 7 and we'll probably go a little over. I apologize for that. There's only so much one can do in an hour, but we're getting somewhere. We've clocked past the repetition of the Amidah on Rosh Hashanah, and we noted that we'd probably sing a few songs and we'd probably insert a few lines here and there. But again, it's not that different. Nothing is really mind-blowing here. Now, here comes something that is different. Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu. Now, this is, I would say, a piyut. It's a poem that is composed, but it's become such a classic poem. And in fact, this one's attributed to Rabbi Akiva, and it employs the metaphor of the king, but also the metaphor of the father. It's like a very, very, very classic and beautifully recited, but important to know that we do not say it on Shabbat. A bit of a bummer, really, you know, because you're like, you know, that's my Rosh Hashanah. Where's my Rosh Hashanah? But just like this, because it is such a like somber, pleading prayer, and Shabbat is thought to be a day of happiness and bliss, we don't recite Avinu Malkeinu on Shabbat. Note that there are some bolded instructions of like how we repeat Avinu Malkeinu, but I think most of us know that the big deal is at the end when we say Avinu Malkeinu Chanenu Vane, right? This right here. So this is like one of the classic melodies of Rosh Hashanah, and we won't say it on the first day this year. We don't say it on Shabbat. Okay, so that comes after in many places throughout the day, but including in the evening and after the morning service. Okay, but not on Shabbat. By the way, this right here is also pretty important. Can you see my cursor there? The ark is closed, the ark is open. Another pro tip, just pay attention for the ark is closed, ark is open, because it happens, as you know, all through the holidays. And the rule of thumb is when the ark is open, you should be standing, right? As if like the Torah walked in the room. Stand up, everybody. When the ark is closed, you can sit. And sometimes it's like stand, sit, stand, sit, stand, sit. Of course, as always, if you have any trouble standing or trouble sitting for that matter, you don't have to. But that ark is closed, ark is open stuff. That's to indicate, you know, a kind of a time to get up. Okay, there's a Kaddish after the morning service, as there is every day of the week, and then we're in the Torah service. Now, I'm going to mention a few things that are different about the Torah service, but mostly the Torah service also looks the same. You may be getting to the limits.
Rabbi Kasher, we actually have this until 7:30.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate it. Great. But I am now missing, where am I? I just feel like it's just not loaded yet. Hold on. Try this one more time. Ooh. Okay, no problem. We'll see what happens. And it's not essential, so I will talk through it. Do a lot of you have it now downloaded on the side, or not really? Some yeses, some nos, people have it. Okay, so I am going to make reference to the prayer book. I don't know why it stopped there, and hopefully it's loading and will load. The Torah service. Now, what page was that on? I'm online and have lost my place. Okay. Okay, the thing about the Torah service that is noteworthy really is just that we stick the shofar service in it, okay, at the end. So the Torah service does have some unique things for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but they're not that big a deal. One of them is that on the holidays, when we open the ark, we have a standard series of recitations, and then we say, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. We say that 3 times. There's the 13 attributes of mercy. We say 3 times, and then we'll recite another thing 3 times. Vani tefilati lecha Adonai. So those come right at the beginning of the Torah service. You'll see everybody still standing, repeating a line 3 times, and then repeating another line 3 times. Let me just double check that oh, disaster. Okay, I'm gonna try one more time to reload this and see if I can get a better disaster. I think maybe reloading will help. Pardon me. Okay, I think that did help. Hold on one sec. Okay, yeah, I'm in it again. I don't know why, but it only downloaded so much. Okay, I'll be back with you in 1 second. Because it does feel a little funny to be speaking. It feels like this is confusing enough, and then just to be sort of like referencing it in the air is a little much to ask. Okay, so here we are again. This is what I was just talking about. As the ark is opened, we say these things here. This is the beginning, and then when the ark we're still standing, we'll repeat this 3 times. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Hapayim Rav Chesed Emet, etc. And then there's a little mumbling, and then another 3-time repetition. This is on all of the holidays. Vani tefilati lecha Adonai. Okay, okay, so that's also said 3 times, and it does feel like a big part of the day, but honestly, we say it on every holiday, so not too much to think about here. Then, of course, the actual readings are distinct, but we're not going to talk about them today because the readings are always distinct. So Rosh Hashanah has its own very particular Torah readings. One of them is the Binding of Isaac, which, a cute and simple story, which I will be teaching tomorrow at noon. So if you want to prepare yourself for the horror, come to my class tomorrow at noon. So there's the Binding of Isaac. There are unique haftarot, the story of Hannah, which is really beautiful, and then a less beautiful lament from Jeremiah on the second day. And then the service of blowing the shofar. Now this is at once the most important part of the day, and also liturgically really no big deal. Like there's a few introductory words of, hey, hooray for God, hooray for God's the sovereign, yay. I call out to God from the narrow straits, listen to me, blah, blah, blah. But it's not really a liturgical creation. It's just there's a blessing here that the Baal Tekiah says, or the Baalat Tekiah says, and then they blow these sounds in the shofar. Again, we would require an entirely different class to go through the sounds, but suffice to say, there are three basic sounds, the Tekiah, the Shvarim, and the Truah. And, you know, that's the whole, right, all those sounds. And this is the shofar service. We all stand for it, we listen to the shofar. That's the most important thing. Honestly, don't tell Rabbi Brous I said so, but you could go home after this. That's it. You did it. Hooray! You achieved Rosh Hashanah. But you would be a fool to go home after this, because after the shofar service and returning the Torah, then we finally come to Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. Okay, let's see where I'm at timing-wise. Okay, I'm at 7:04, and now I want to take you through just the basic structure. This is the last thing we'll do tonight, but in some ways the most important, the basic structure of Musaf. And as I said, it is a masterpiece, and it's quite complex. In order to understand it, we have to go all the way back to the Mishnah. We were just looking at Maimonides. Maimonides is 1,000 years ago, more than 1,000 years ago. The Mishnah is nearly 1,000 years before that. The Mishnah is compiled in the year 220, and it is the first sense we get of like, who were these rabbis and what were they up to? Okay, and one of the things they're up to is figuring out what are the blessings? What blessings do we say? Maimonides is only repeating what he's heard from the rabbis. So we're going all the way back, and forgive me, this text is a little bit hard to follow, but we know the basics already, which is that there are these three blessings in the middle of Musaf, okay? So I just want you to see where they first get mentioned, and then there's sort of very elegant suggestion for how these blessings would be laid out, okay? So we're going now into the Mishnah, which is in your Sefaria link, which I think I can probably just put in the chat again. Let's see, here's the Sefaria link again, okay? And then, it's a lot of Zooming tonight, a lot of Zoom problems, a lot of Zoom opportunities. Okay, here we go. We're in the Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah, okay. So the order of blessings in the Musaf Amida is this. And there's a debate here, which I just, this emerges in the form of a debate, so that's just the way it is. It'll be a little confusing, but I'll explain at the end. One says the first blessing, because remember the first three are standard. Ancestors blessing, avot. And then the second blessing, God's might. And then the third blessing, the holiness of God's name. And, says this first opinion, you include the theme of kingship, malchuyot, with that third blessing, right? So, first three blessings, but stick malchuyot into the third blessing. And you don't blow the shofar. Now, that's already a clue that in the middle three blessings of Musaf, after the shofar service, there's more shofar blowing, and that's because after each of the middle three blessings, you blow the shofar. Okay, that's important information. Then there's the fourth blessing, which, like it is on every day, is about the holiness of the day, and then you blow the shofar. Then there's the fifth blessing. Remember, we got to cover these three themes. The fifth blessing is remembrance, and you blow the shofar. And the sixth blessing is shofarot, and then you blow the shofar. And then you say the last three blessings, the temple service, Thanksgiving, the blessing of the priests. I don't know why they call the last blessing the blessing of the priests. You do say the blessing of the priests, but it's a funny way to call it. This is the words of Yochanan ben Nuri, okay? So Yochanan ben Nuri says, and it's not so important because the disagreeing opinion will be the one that we'll follow, but he says, say the first 3 blessings, stick kingship in the third, then say the holiness of the day, and then the 2 other things that Maimonides already told us about, remembrance and shofarot, and then 3 more last blessings. That's his version of the Rosh Hashanah Musaf. But Rabbi Akiva said, what do you mean? If you put kingship in that 3rd blessing, and we have a rule that we only blow shofar in the middle 3 blessings, I love this language. Rabbi Akiva said to him, if one does not blow the shofar for kingship, why would one even say it? What are you mentioning all these things if we're not going to toot the horn? I'm not sure exactly what's in that question, but I love it. Rather, Rabbi Akiva says, and this is the way we do it, you say the first 3 blessings, ancestors, God's might, and the holiness of God's name, and include shofar in the 4th blessing, the holiness of the day, and you blow the shofar, and then you say remembrance and blow the shofar, and then you say the shofar, and then you blow the shofar, and then you say the last 3 blessings. Now, I know that sounded confusing. Don't worry, I've got a little graph for you right down here. But the simple way to say it is first 3 blessing, the way the Rambam said it, the way Maimonides said it, first 3 blessings, then kingship, remembrance, shofar, last 3 blessings, okay? We're gonna see that soon, but here's where things get really beautiful. Now, they're already theologically interesting. We already did a very quick discussion of what is kingship, what is remembrance, but things get really beautiful because they say that in those blessings, we do not recite less than 10 kingship verses, 10 remembrance verses, and 10 shofar verses. Now, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, who was the rejected opinion above, poor guy, also says you could actually only just say 3, but that's not what we do. Right? Now, what verses are they talking about? They go on to discuss like, oh, we should choose nice ones. Don't say ones that have to do with punishment, but well, that's just a detail. The last information that we need before we dip back into the Machzor one more time is that one begins with verses from the Torah and concludes with verses from the prophets. Okay, now that's weird, and it's not 100% clear why, but if I say it this way, maybe it'll click for somebody. The way that we map this out, remember there are 10 verses that we're going to say for each one, and you're going to see this soon, so if it's confusing, don't worry. The first 3 verses are verses taken from the Torah that mention kingship. The second 3 verses, meaning, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, are verses taken from the books of the writings, the later writing, Ketuvim, that mention kingship. Then the last 3 are verses from the books of the prophets that mention kingship, 3, okay? And then the 10th is 1 more from the Torah. Okay, now what's weird about that? Anyone know? There's something very funny about that order.
Putting the writings before the prophets is a bit out of order.
Correct. Somebody knows his Tanakh. That's right. The way that the Hebrew Bible is organized is Torah, prophets, Ketuvim, Torah, prophets, later writings. And for some reason that I truly do not know, and I can give you some of the commentaries' explanations, but I don't know, Ketuvim is placed before prophets. So the way it works is 3 verses from Torah, 3 verses from Ketuvim, 3 verses from prophets, and 1 verse from the Torah. This is very complex, so let me show you a little graph of how this works. The only good explanation I've heard is that for liturgical purposes, the writings of Ketuvim, the latest writings in the Hebrew Bible and Tanakh, are more important because they include things like the Psalms, which is what we draw from the most. But I've never fully understood exactly the why behind this, but the structure is what's really critical to see here. Because once we see this, we begin to see the architecture of the one truly Rosh Hashanah designed service. In Yom Kippur, we're going to have a lot more work to do, and in some ways, that's why we spent so much time tonight clearing the ground with some of those standard prayers, because what's really distinct about Rosh Hashanah is, besides the shofar service itself, it's this Amidah here, and it goes like this. The first 3 blessings, right? Avot, Gvurot, Kedushat Hashem. The middle 3 blessings, Malchuyot, which takes place in the 4th blessing. 3 verses from the Torah, 3 Melech verses from the writings, 3 Melech verses from the prophets, 1 more from the Torah. Same thing for Zichronot, right? Same structure, and same for Shofarot, and then into the last 3 blessings. Okay, that is quite intricate. That's like quite a system there. And you know, if this were one of my regular classes, I would want us to sit here and think about why 10? What's it doing? What's going on? Why are we surveying all the? There also aren't obvious answers there. The Talmud says why 10? Because in the 150th Psalm, David has 10 hallelujahs. Hallelujah el bekadsho, hallelujah bekirazo. That's not a good answer. That's not a good answer. What? So I don't know what the answer, and the answer might be 10's a nice good number. The answer might be there are 10 mystical emanations. I don't know what it is, but this is the way it works. And let's take a look now as our last sort of act of the night. Let's take a look one more time at the Machzor to see this play out. Okay. Let me just pause, by the way. All my rambling, I forget there are little brief moments. Any questions here? Anything confusing before we look at this? Most of you you're going with my insane manic flow and just like, okay, you just go ahead, no questions for you. So I appreciate it. We're trying to get through this as quickly as possible, given the amount of material. But here's Musaf, and this is really the big deal. Now, there's a silent Amidah, and in that silent Amidah, you too will say a lot of the stuff you said in the silent Amidah in the morning, but you too will say. Remember I said earlier, the piyutim, these little poems, they only appear in the repetition. Well, that might be so, but the blessings, those go all the way back. So those have to be said. So in your silent Amidah, you'll notice after the first sort of 3 blessings here, where are they? Okay. The 3rd blessing ends here, and then we get into you've chosen us from among all the peoples. We saw that before. That's kind of standard holiday liturgy, 4th blessing. And then in the 4th blessing, as Rabbi Akiva suggested, suddenly God's sovereignty, Malchuyot. Now, important to mention here, as we have arrived at like the main event, that one of the big things that happens in Malchuyot is, and this is a prayer composed for the Rosh Hashanah Amidah, it is a prayer that you may have heard of known as Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabech ladon hakol. We say this after every prayer. We came to say this after every prayer service, but it starts here, folks. Aleinu is from, you may not have known this, Aleinu is from the Musaf on Rosh Hashanah. It is essentially a piyut. It's a beautiful description of God's kingship, sovereignty. Lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu. Why is it so important that God is the king of all kings? Because we're in Malchuyot, right? And we'll say this every day of the year. So now you know where it comes from. In fact, I think one of the other beautiful pieces in Aleinu is the first mention of Tikkun Olam, which is right here. But it means something very different. L'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai, establishing in the world the sovereignty of the Almighty. Okay, that phrase will get repurposed a lot throughout the histories, but it first appears here. So there's your source for Tikkun Olam. Okay, but here is what we have been gunning towards all along, which is this is what they required for these blessings, is that you say, oh, God's such a great king, God's such a great sovereign, yay, 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 as it is written in your Torah. And then there are 3 verses. Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, God will be sovereign forever. That's from Exodus. V'nemar lo hibit avam v'Yaakov v'lo re'eh amal b'Yisrael Adonai Elohav imo v'turat melech bo. That's in God does not gaze upon the errors of Jacob nor look upon the sins of Israel. Adonai, their God, is with them. They're sovereigns that claim. So you can just see what they're doing here. That's in the book of Numbers. The next one's in the book of Deuteronomy, but they all mention Melech, and they're nice verses with the word Melech in it. Then jump to the book of Psalms. Wait, let me make this a little bigger. The book of Psalms. Another one from the book of Psalms. Another one from the book of Psalms. I guess it really is Psalms that makes Ketuvim, the writings, such a big deal. And then 3 more from the prophets, right? The prophets say, liberator shall ascend to Mount Zion to judge Mount Esau, and then sovereignty shall be Adonai's. So that's from the prophet Obadiah, and then the prophet Zechariah, and then for a nice even number, one more verse from the Torah. And by the way, this one's fascinating. This is a little footnote here. The last verse in Melech does not actually mention Melech. The last verse in Melech is actually just the Shema, that's fascinating. That's a little inside baseball, because saying the Shema is thought to be the accepting of God's kingship or sovereignty upon oneself. So that's like, oh, we don't even have to mention Melech. So kind of a cool little like wink at you there. And then we're not going to go through in as great detail, but you get it. You sort of see what's going on, I hope, which is then we close out the blessing for Malchuyot, which ends Mekadesh Yisrael B'Yom HaZikaron, because remember, it's in the fourth blessing. So it has that. And then there's a shofar sound, right? Sometimes they do it even during the silent Amidah. So you'll be like praying your silent Amidah and you'll hear, like as if trying to pace with you. But they definitely do it during the repetition. Same thing, we've pretty much done our work for the night, but just so same thing for Zichronot, right? Remember, and by the way, we had some confusion earlier. What is Zichronot? Well, these verses do seem to give you a sense of what it might be. God remembered Noah, right? God remembered the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and saved them from Egypt. God remembered the covenant of Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob, and so delivered them back to the land. So it seems like the remembrance is something like, oh, there was good stuff that happened, or there were like promises, or there were things that God noticed. You remember what you've done before. Remember the good deeds we've done, but remember the past, and therefore give us some relief in this moment. So same thing, Psalms. Let me make this a little bigger. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. I'll leave this to you to like figure out like what is the, there's a lot of beautiful analysis to be done here. Oh, and then one more from the Torah. Here from Leviticus, I will remember the covenant. And then the shofar, and then same thing, but now we get very meta because we're gonna talk about the shofar and then blow the shofar, and so they find 3 verses in the Torah where the shofar is mentioned. And as Yonatan said before, interestingly, let me go back one sec. This I just can't help but mention, another little footnote here. Interestingly, shofar is not mentioned for the holiday of Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. That's called Yom Truah, or Yom Zichron Truah, the day of the sound. Note my first Ikar Rosh Hashanah sermon where I talk about that. But so they have to instead go to the place where the shofar is mentioned, which is on Mount Sinai. Okay? It's sort of interesting that the origins of shofar are not really with Rosh Hashanah, they're with Mount Sinai. So part of what I'm trying to say here is that, and here we continue with shofar, 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 shofar. And then a final blessing of shofar. Let's see. All of these blessings end with a blessing. I mean, all of these, end with a blessing that's, as Maimonides said, designated to the appropriate. So let's see what this one is. Blessed are you, where are you? Adonai, who listens with compassion to the sounds of the splintered call of your people Israel. Baruch atah Hashem, shomea kol truat amo Yisrael barachamim. So, and then another shofar blow. So you should pour through this. You should like try and look, what are all these verses? You should have a chevruta. You should so many things are not available to us this year. Take some time and really get to know the Musaf Amidah in all of its complexity. But with that, we basically have done the work for Rosh Hashanah. Okay, then the 7th, 8th, and 9th blessings. And then that was just, by the way, what we just did, that was just in the silent prayer. You'll see this whole thing repeated again in the repetition, which contains things like the piyut unetane tokef, which we're not going to be discussing tonight. Lots of piyutim, lots of piyutim, lots of piyutim, lots of piyutim in the, and here's one that's beloved at Ikar. There's V'ye'etayu, right? If you've been with us, you know this one, but it's, dare I say, just a piyut. There's that last line, V'yitnu lecha keter melucha, right? To crown you as sovereign. But why is that piyut written for Rosh Hashanah? Why is it such a big deal for Rosh Hashanah? Because you should know by now. Why is this one such a big deal? Someone call it out. Nobody's going to call it out.
Melech.
Melech, thank you, whoever that was. I can't even, my screen's so distorted now. Because of kingship. So this is a piyut. It means you can skip it. Better believe that Hillel's not going to skip it this year because it's become a kind of favorite of ours. But there it is. That's Vayetayu. And then we're back in this, there we are again, Malchuyot, right? Zichronot, we've already done this, right? So we're not going to do it again. I just want to tell you that at the end of all this, just to give you a sense of what I just want to repeat what I said at the outset, which is here's some more piyutim, and then shofrot, and then it's very big, it's very long, it's very complicated. But at the end of it, here's one last piyut, hayom, and then what do we have? A kaddish, and then ein keloheinu, just like on Shabbat. Like after we're done, in other words, with the, I can't seem to get out of this screen. After we're done with the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah in all its complexity, and I'm just going to put one more time on screen the diagram that you now have of Musaf. Once we finish, that besides the shofar itself, that's where the liturgy is really interesting, complex, thematic, architecturally envisioned. Aside from that, we're just back into like, you know, Mincha and Rosh Hashanah, not a big deal. Marav and Rosh Hashanah, not a big, I mean, it's like Shabbat in a way. It's Musaf where things really scream out like, these are the three themes. Every one of them has 10 verses. So we see these themes tracing their way across our tradition. And then we blow a shofar. It's very like, there's a lot to be said here, a lot to process, but we're getting close to the end of our time. So I'll leave it there, but I got where at least I wanted to go, which is at least a strong underlining of like, it's all about Musaf, folks. It's all about Musaf. The shofar service, which is found in the Torah service, and Musaf. Okay. Fin, okay? With that I close. Now, I will stay on for the next 5 minutes and answer questions. I'm sorry, there should be a half an hour to answer questions, but you know, you can only do what you can do. So Kathy.
So I just wanted to ask about the Hineni, what the cantor does the whole thing. I see that it's at the beginning of the repetition, but just liturgically, I mean, and then also is the Aleinu was the big Aleinu where we prostrate and everything. Is that right?
Correct. It's the same Aleinu, but it's just called the great Aleinu because that's where we bow down on the ground, right? V'anachnu korim, we just bow over. But on Yom Kippur, we bow all the way. There's all sorts of weird historical reasons. We don't want to look like the Muslims kind of thing, you know, heresy, this, that. But yes, Aleinu. In terms of the other prayer you asked about, let's see if I can get it here. It is certainly one of the most beautiful prayers in all of the high holidays, and maybe we'll cover it more next time. But before the Chazan repeats Musaf, the Chazan or Chazanit says this prayer, which just like they themselves say, and it's just so striking. Here, let's see. Just read a few lines. This one's all in Hebrew. Oh, here I stand, impoverished in merit, trembling in the presence of the one who hears the prayers of Israel. Even though I am unfit and unworthy for the task, I come to represent your people Israel and plead on their behalf. It is a beautiful prayer. Sometimes the Chazan will say it quietly, sometimes they'll recite it in this sort of long, but it's supposed to be anguish like, oh my gosh, I'm actually saying the Musaf of this day, which is the most important thing of all, and I'm not up to the task, but, so that's that prayer. And we'll flag it for next time. We'll look at it in greater depth next time. Alexandra.
I'm wondering, I think the word was reshut, and it was defined as domain, is that correct? And so I'm wondering if like a workable, appropriate definition would be personal sovereignty, especially in contrast to sovereignty and yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean like, could we substitute the notions of our own personal sovereignty for the sovereign, just sort of like conceptually, philosophically?
No, not not for the sovereignty of God, but for I'm referencing the previous class when you talked about, I guess, sorry, I didn't give enough context. So the prep up to Rosh Hashanah involving tshuva and acknowledgement of our own like domain. So I was thinking about
free will. We translated it as free will.
Oh, okay. And so personal sovereignty, would that like be a workable definition for, I don't know the Hebrew well enough, and I was wondering about that.
Yeah,
and
that's an interesting question. That's too much to get into right now, I think, but those ideas, I will say this, those ideas are in tension. Alexandra's mentioned in class before where we studied the primacy of free will and our ability to choose for ourselves within Maimonides' conception of the concept of tshuva, repentance. We're responsible for our own actions. That stands in some kind of tension with all of the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah, which is so much about like, you're in charge of everything. You're the king. You're the one. You're the, like, there's this idea that we've done our tshuva and that's now, please you, king, help us. Like, you can by royal edict nullify all the decrees, even if we haven't done all the work. So that's sort of how those two concepts are interplaying conceptually. In the liturgy, we don't see anything about free will mentioned, right? I mean, we do sometimes see we did these things, so I guess that was our free will, but it's much more about like our submission to God. Okay, let's see. I have time for one last question. One last question. Who's got a question? I don't see any questions. That means I have perfectly explained everything. What a great feeling that is. Okay, I'm always available for, Q&A or follow up or email me and just say, hey, this wasn't clear at all. Or just I have suggestions for next time, because next week we're gonna be doing the same thing for Yom Kippur, but don't worry, it won't be the same thing because we've laid the ground. We sort of cleared the ground to say like, okay, there's a morning service on Yom Kippur, sure. But let's look at Musaf, what's happening in Musaf. But with Yom Kippur, there are other things to look at. Rosh Hashanah actually really only has the shofar service and Musaf as sort of extra. With Yom Kippur, as we already learned, we have a whole other service in the Ila, along with Musaf, and with Yom Kippur, critically, we've got the Vidui confessional. And we'll be looking at that next week as well, okay? But in the meantime, let's just prepare for Rosh Hashanah. That's big enough. So I wish everybody a Shana Tova Metuka, a beautiful, happy, above all, healthy year. And again, if you're interested in the Binding of Isaac tomorrow at 12, otherwise, I will see you in the new year. Bye, everyone.